Thank you very much for all coming down to this meeting about the terrible Grenfell Tower fire. We want to talk about the truth about Grenfell Tower. That means not just the fire, but actually about the tower itself and the estate it's on. And we want to sort of try to combat the very negative perceptions which are being spread in the press about these estates. And specifically, the idea that the reaction to this fire is to pull down every tower block, estate tower block in London. Because that's a narrative which has really caught hold and is a very, very dangerous one. The other reason we're holding this meeting is because last Saturday, Annette, where is Annette? There you are. Who's the, are you still the chair or? Okay, no, but she's on the TRA for Cotton Gardens Estate. We ran into her and she said, bloody hell, I've already got over 50 residents on this estate alone ringing me up saying, is it safe here? Which is, I think, a clear reaction to the kind of fear-mongering that's being spread and the kind of disinformation that's being spread about the safety of these tower blocks. We're going to divide the meeting into, I guess, sort of 25-minute slots. The first one is to share what we know, what we know collectively about the technical causes of the Grenfell Tower fire. The second thing we want to address is to expose the political and bureaucratic decisions that allowed those technical conditions to be put in place. Okay? So you've got the technical conditions that led to the fire, or caused the fire, spread the fire, but also we want to look at the political and bureaucratic decisions that put those in place. Because I think that's something which is being left out in the kind of more general conversation about this fire. The third thing we're going to do, having, if you like, accumulated this knowledge about the reasons, the causes of the fire, is then to try and come to some sort of, make some reassurances or come to some judgment about the extent to which council tower blocks in London are or not safe. And obviously what we can do about it if they're not safe. And the final thing we're going to talk about is, because we are a housing campaign group as well as an architectural group, is what we can do, how we can organise to oppose this narrative that all estates are dangerous, therefore we should pull them down. That because the Grenfell Tower fire happened, therefore all tower blocks and all estates are compromised. So that's the four things we're going to have a look at here. We know some people who live on the Silchester estate, which is directly opposite of it, and they actually live at the foot of the tower. And they showed us some footage which they took. And as we know, it started on the 4th floor, but the flames went up this far left corner. And they said from the fire starting, it went up around the corner of the building. The cladding created a kind of a box around what was a triangle of the corner. So you've got the corner and then a box cladding around it here. And they said it simply shot straight up like a chimney, and there was this great big long line of flame. And then this flame then moved laterally across the cladding, but in a diagonal, because it started at the bottom like this. And all the photos that we're seeing coming out of this confirms this is exactly what happened.
Just a really important thing in terms of the kind of work that we do, which was said by Arnold Tarling, who's a chartered surveyor and fire safety specialist on the BBC, I think, through the tears. The fire would not have spread if the building had not been altered. And I think that's really, really important when we're thinking about our existing estates. Were fire stops not installed or installed wrongly? If that building had not been altered, why were there no alarms? The fire would not have spread. Should people have stayed put? Gone anywhere. So a building, from an architectural point of view, as a designer, a building is the sum of its parts. So you change one aspect of that building, and you need to change the way you think about it holistically, as a whole. So when you design a building, the fire escapes, the fire safety, the materials, that's all part of it. You change one of those things, you change everything, and that's absolutely crucial. When people start to engage and alter a building, they need to understand that they're altering the way in which it operates as a system. The first question, why did the fire spread? So started inside the building, potentially some kind of faulty wiring or fridge blowing up, something like that. Again, we don't really know. We're trying not to speculate in here. If we don't know something, we don't know. I think that's important to say what we do and we don't know. We know that a fire started, and it sounded like, as far as I know, there were some fire people that were called to that fire and thought they'd put it out. So evidently, then I don't know whether they then left, but then somehow the fire had to get from the inside to the outside. there are all sorts of holes in walls, ventilation, ducts, all those sorts of things. They obviously need to be protected themselves, need to have fire protection around them, fire stopping. We don't necessarily know about the workmanship of those holes. Did they seal them all up? Was there something new that had gone in that allowed the passage of fire through that hole? So then it gets to the outside, and one of the things that struck me when I first heard about this particular cladding method is that you have this insulation, which is seen there as the yellow, which is stuck on, fixed back, screwed back into the existing concrete, and it's about 15 centimetres thick. And then you've got a gap, which is called a cavity, a ventilation cavity, which essentially is about letting any moisture build up within that kind of construction, letting that sort of drip out. And the insulation has a kind of foil front on it, it's a sort of very thin sort of foil sort of surface. So what you get is you get a chimney effect. You know how chimneys work. You have air at the top and hot air at the bottom, and you get a kind of movement of air, and that air ends up drawing, like a chimney does, drawing the heat up. So again, that's another thing that people have been aware of as possibly fueling the fire, which started at the bottom, and the speed with which it went. So these are just some of the drawings of the cladding, and you can see the columns. Interestingly, and the column here has an even greater gap. So if we're talking about this idea of this chimney effect, the gap around the column here is even bigger than going up anywhere else. And on the corner, it would probably be even bigger again. So if we're looking at that chimney effect of like having the air dragging the flames up the building, then it seems quite clear that something's happening there. And interestingly, this insulation wraps inside the building. So again, we were talking about how does it get out of the building from the far inside, and how does it get from the inside to the out? The insulation, this is all wrapping around there. So there's a huge kind of like break through this sort of supposedly sort of protective barrier, but there's no fire. So a fire break is something that would be horizontally stop that gap basically. And in theory they're meant to be provided, but I can't see them on any drawings.
Well, there was a little detail shown in the garden. What it's how authentic it is, I don't know, but it showed that there was a fire stop at each floor. However, the fire stopped short of the ventilation gap. And in the external panel, the rain screen was itself flammable.
Right, yeah.
That fire stop was doing absolutely nothing.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, the fire stop, if the fire is only going up here, if this is non-flammable, the fire, then it would stop it. But as you say, if this is flammable, then it's not going to do anything, is it? Yeah. That's just showing, like, basically, so this is showing, how you fix, so this is looking down, sort of a horizontal plan of the building, so that's how you fix these metal brackets, basically. So the metal brackets will fix back in through the concrete, and this is something quite interesting that somebody brought up, one of our members brought up, was that, this also compromises the integrity of the concrete. So these concrete buildings, they're there, but they've got reinforcement bars inside, which is generally about 5 centimetres. You've got 5 centimetres of concrete, and then you've got your reinforcement bars, and so these are they're going to break through that, and they're going to potentially let moisture in, let water inside. So they're not really doing your existing concrete structure any favours at all. They're making it potentially worse. So again, we're looking at what these modifications do. Even just things like fixing something to the existing structure is going to potentially damage it. So I'll move along. So that's this thing that these you can see where these fixings go through into the existing structure, and this guy was here saying moisture penetration can destroy reinforced concrete and can shorten the life of the building. So cladding does not fix internal problems, makes them worse.
Yeah, I just want to make a point just based on a number of different council blocks that I've lived in and gone through refurbs. I think gaps are a really big issue, the gaps between the different materials, which, as any architect knows, you've got to detail those things so carefully, especially around fire prevention. And I don't, in a number of cases, I think, one, we probably find that there aren't any detailed drawings, and two, I'm not sure that inspections happen to check how the gaps are being handled. And so many of the contracts are subcontracted out to different groups, and I think that isn't monitored either. But I just have a feeling that these gaps are probably where some of the problem lies, as well as the actual specification of the material.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah. So this is the specification for that cladding. This is what they actually installed, what was paid for, I suppose, essentially. And so this says column cladding, mezzanine and above. So that's those kind of that's the columns on the outside. They're sort of a rotated square. Aluminium composite panel, Rainer Bond rain screen cassette. And the other one, solid spandrel rain screen panels, which are basically the ones that are fixed onto the kind of the external walls. And that's the same thing. So aluminium composite panel. And interestingly, I don't think I've got an image of this, but if you look at the original design drawings, it's not an aluminium cassette at all, it's zinc. So it's something else. So at some point, there was a design which potentially may have got signed off by somebody, and at some point down the way that changed.
So does that actually say Renault?
Yes, it does.
Does it specify which of the two?
No, it doesn't. That's what as far as I could see, it doesn't specify which one.
What's the significance of the difference between the two?
Well, the difference between the two is actually the crucial difference, isn't it? So there's two panels, one of which has a fire rating of something, and the other one doesn't. And so, I mean, So essentially, that's the theory. Absolutely, we don't know what was actually installed. We don't know. Once their panel is also, you can't see what's inside it. So once it's there, you've got no idea really of what's.
Hi, I just also wondered, do we know if the aluminium itself caught fire? Because aluminium burns really hot.
Yeah, I mean, there is a video that I saw which they tested one of those panels, and the whole thing did burn. So yeah, eventually the aluminium does. And interesting, somebody on our page mentioned the fact that not all fires respond to water very well. And is it magnesium fires or something? So there may well be.
Aluminium would have been worse if you got molten aluminium and it becomes explosive.
Well, yeah. So you're kind of you're pumping water at this thing, and actually maybe that's not necessarily the best thing either. Okay, so this is just quickly shows the kind of build-up. So you've got the concrete, the insulation, and this kind of gap, and then this cladding panel, which is the thing that went up in flames, and that looks at this core, which is this kind of. So everyone talks about plastic. Essentially, the outside is metal. It was aluminium, and it's the inside, which is this kind of polyethylene core, which is the flammable bit. The yellow stuff.
Oh, the yellow.
So that's the thermal insulation. That was 15 centimetres, and that was this stuff called Celotex.
It's quite thick.
Yeah, it's thick. That's the thermal thing. That's what keeps it. That's what regulates the temperature, basically. So their argument is they're putting it on to improve the energy performance of the building. And that has a class. That has a kind of classification, which is called Class 0. Which you would think Class 0, you can't get any better than that, can you? But actually, it doesn't mean it's not combustible.
Oh, right.
No, well, that's what I found.
I think there are two terms which are getting confused. One is spread of flame. I think there was Class 0 spread of flame. That doesn't mean it's non-combustible.
Yeah.
And then there's the fire resistance, which is the length of time it would take for a fire playing on it for a certain length of time to get through, which is for a containment in a high building would normally be 1 hour. So this building will have 1 hour fire resistance.
I thought, being elderly, that the installation of gas pipes in tower blocks was one of the recommendations after the 1968 Rome Point explosion. The gas pipe shouldn't be fitted in any building above 5 stories. Is that true?
I can answer that. After the Rome Point disaster, gas had to be taken out of any big panel system buildings such as this one. It was still permitted in buildings with in situ concrete frames, which would apply to Grenfell Tower. But what is illegal, completely illegal, is to have an unprotected, exposed pipe carrying gas in an escape route.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and I was surprised myself, to be honest. I couldn't really understand, and I think when you put something like that, it would have casing around it. So one of the things about like these blocks as well, and the Grenfell as well, the way in which fire is understood is in compartments. So your building would be compartmentalised, and the way in which we talked about things, penetrating through walls, the way you kind of contain them, and services obviously also travel vertically through the building, the way you contain them is by things like plasterboard. But obviously that still only has an hour's, kind of fire resistance, maybe 2 hours. But obviously there is going to be a point at which that fails. I mean, this was burning for, 24 hours or something, so if that protection, a fire door maybe is a 1 hour, 2 hour fire door, there will be a point where that then fails as well. So even those precautions of containing something is potentially not adequate.
All gas pipes now shouldn't even be running up service calls on the interior of blocks. They were moving all the gas pipes to the exterior of the block for safety reasons. I don't know if that applies across, but that's definitely what was going on in the suburbs.
So you mean that was retrospectively or in new builds?
No, retrospectively.
We've looked something at the actual what should have been a localized fire. We think it was a fridge blew up, which should have been contained within a safe area, as fires generally are on these estates. Why we've seen some of the reasons why it's spread and turned into this, literally into this inferno. What I want to look at now is how this happened, why those lethal conditions were in place, how that could have happened. And I want to look at the bureaucratic structures that led to this, and I also want to have a look at the political decisions that were behind these structures and this technical conditions being put in place. Now, it's very important that these are about facts, that we're producing knowledge here, not simply opinions. Anyone who's been consulted, any resident here who's been consulted as part of a consultation process by a council knows that absolutely everything you said is used to justify it. As Murray knows over there, Lib Peck, the leader of Lambeth Council, started the consultation on the regeneration of Central Hill Estate and Cressing Gardens by asking residents, would you like a new kitchen? That's led to them now being told that their entire estate's going to be demolished. This is what I'm kind of saying about it. We've got to be careful about opinions about estates made often by people who don't know anything about them, being then taken as kind of knowledge or gospel about it. Let me just go on to, this kind of addresses maybe your question or your statement. This is something which I think it came out of The Guardian or something. It was about the contractual structure that led to the technical conditions being put in place that we've just looked at. At the centre here, you've got Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Organisation. And it shows the subcontractors, the businesses, the private businesses, that they contracted out the refurbishment of the estate. So before we get on to why the estate was refurbished, let's look at how it was refurbished. Yeah? Now, one of the things they did is they contracted out this company called Artelia UK. Now, that's a private company which specialises in cost management. Now, they were contracted by Kensington and Chelsea to be the project managers on the Grenfell Tower refurbishment, which was last year. Okay. Now, on its website page, on residential services, Artelia says that, and I'm quoting here, it works closely with our clients to understand what success looks like to them, to the client. Okay. Nothing about the residents here. And how we can make that success a reality. Now, among its experiences, as it calls it, the company lists precisely refurbishment projects for local authorities. Okay, so this is not a one-off, it's something it's done a lot of the time. On its page on health and safety management, it says its management of health and safety results in a, quote, safer, better, more cost-effective project. On its page on design and construction management, and this is what it's doing here when it's doing this refurbishment, it says, we take full responsibility for architects, engineers, contractors, and suppliers in a seamless process that drives out inefficiencies. So this company is saying on its own website that it is responsible for all the subcontractors here, the people who supply the parts, the people who put them on, the people who do the design, okay? So you kind of think this is the people that we're looking at to take responsibility for this. But it's not quite as simple as that. On the page describing its involvement in the Grenfell Tower refurbishment project, Artelia says that it was appointed as the employer's agent, the employer here being Kensington Chelsea Tenant Management Organisation, as the quantity surveyor and as, and this is the one I want to focus on, the construction, design and management coordinator, the CDM coordinator. So I looked up what is a construction, design and management coordinator, and it says that they are responsible for, its role is, I'm going to read out these, to advise the client, Kensington Chelsea TMO, on matters relating to health and safety during the design process and during the planning phases of construction. Its role is also to notify the health and safety executive of the particulars specified in Schedule 1 of the regulations, to advise the client as to the adequacy of the resources used, to coordinate health and safety aspects of the design work, to advise on the suitability, coordination and compatibility of design in relation to health and safety, to advise on the adequacy of the construction phase plan before construction works begins, to advise on the adequacy of any changes to the construction phase plan, and finally, to prepare or compile the health and safety file and issue it to the client at the end of the construction phase. So their role is completely in containing all the health and safety issues relating to this fire. However, on the 6th of April 2015, so about a year before this, the construction, design and management regulations were changed. And the role of the coordinator was transferred to the principal designer, who is responsible for the pre-construction phase. So in the case of Grenfell Tower, this is Studio E architects, the people here, okay? And to the principal contractor, who is responsible for the construction phase. In this case, this is this company you've heard a lot about, Ryden, with the people who were responsible for putting the cladding on. So it's unclear at this point what Artelia's role is, because it seems, according to these regulations, that it's been devolved to the architects and to the company who is the refurbishment company. Now, under these new CDM regulations, the client, which is in this case is Kensington Chelsea TMO, is responsible for, and I quote, ensuring that both the principal designer and contractor, so Studio E Architects and Ryden, are complying with their duties, and for making health and safety executive notification. But it also notes that in the Architects Journal, when they were talking about these changed regulations, it says, this may be difficult for architects where the principal designer has no contractual authority over the people who are working for them. Now, I went onto Studio E Architects' website, and it says it will be ready to assist the relevant authorities as and when we are required. They also described the Grenfell fire as a tragic incident. Now, then I also went onto Ryden's website, the principal contractor, and they say, as I think the gentleman over there said, it said, their work met all required building regulations, as well as fire regulation and health and safety standards, and that the handover took place when completion notice was issued by the Royal Borough of Kensington Chelsea Building Control. They also described the fire as a tragedy. Now, the completion certificate, it's very hard to follow this, but it's kind of the way this kind of labyrinthine thing kind of works. This completion certificate issued by Kensington Chelsea Planning Control Manager says that as far as could be ascertained, after taking all reasonable steps, the building work carried out on the refurbishment of Grenfell Tower complied with the relevant provisions. But it also adds, this certificate is evidence, but not conclusive evidence, that the relevant requirements specified below, that is Schedule 1, have been complied with. It's not quite finished. The Kensington Chelsea Council website, if you go onto the page in which they talk about this, it says the work was completed but not approved. But then they've got another page saying, this does not mean, and I'm quoting them here, that the work was not approved under the building regulations. They go on to explain the formal signing off of the work was provided by a completion certificate and not by a full plans decision notice, which they say was not required in this place. In other words, does an architect want to explain this to us all, exactly what this means? What is the difference? Why was not a full plans notice required for this enormous work?
If you go through the self-certified route, then the local authority itself doesn't actually ask for or check the building works as regards to full plans in that way.
I mean, I think that was what I had originally thought as well, because there's a new system which started not that long ago called approved inspectors, which basically is a privatisation of this whole process, which basically says you can pay a private guy to certify your building for you. And I think that's what you're talking about. I think, in fact, in this case, I don't think that is what happened. I'm not entirely, although I'm actually not sure. But there are these two systems. There's a full plans application, which means that you design the whole building, or all the works, and then you submit those plans to the local authority in advance. They then have 6 weeks to look over those plans, make sure everything is okay. You then get a go ahead, and then you start the work. That's not what they did. They did something called a building notice, which I was very surprised when I heard this. You would normally use this on a very small project, where you basically, you just tell them 2 days before the works begins, and you just tell them it's going to start, and then they just come and certify it as you go along. The planning permission runs out after a certain time, and putting in a building notice would somehow they say, well, we started building. And I think your other point was cost, because basically this means you can start sooner, but it means you're starting on site before you've actually finished designing the thing yet. So, so it's definitely a cost-saving exercise, and time, because you're starting sooner.
And then there's less resident sort of involvement because you've got a rollout of conditions, which are then often internal communications between officers and the developer, because they're condition after condition on large schemes. It's unending, isn't it? You know.
It is legally possible to start building work before you've got building regs consent.
Yeah.
But in that case, you do it at your own risk.
That's what this was.
And the building inspector can come along and say you've got to demolish all that and start again because it's not approved.
Yeah. But they did. They came and they inspected it 16 times and they didn't. They didn't.
Incompetent inspectors.
My question is on final inspection. Yes. No matter if you start before or what in between, at the end of the day, you have to sign it off as being work fit for the purpose and meeting all the regulations. Now, based on what you have been explaining, it is done but not done. And so, what is the final position? Was it ever done?
Yeah, it sounded like it was certified. I think it's because the way in which you do it, if you go down the full plans route, you get a different kind of certificate at the end of it. It sounds like. Again, I'm not an expert in this actually, but I think it sounds like it was approved, but because it didn't go through the full plans route, they couldn't certify it in the same way. So I think it's a kind of technicality. I think they will probably say it was certified as building regulations approved. I suspect, again, this is just me suspecting, that they will argue that it was compliant, because that will also get them off the. It's about pointing the blame. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. But, I mean, yeah. But you're right. It's not obvious to me. It's not obvious. So.
I've got a question, kind of going right back to the other end of the process, and the CDM responsibilities. Did anyone at any point do a fire modelling exercise of that building? Because that surely would have been the CDM chief contractor or whoever was responsible for that. And particularly given previous incidents surrounding these claims. So whilst the building might have been compliant with all of these individual regulations, there still is a duty to manage that risk and to be aware of that risk. And it goes back to your very first point about a building being more than the sum of its parts. So the building has been, in regulation terms, broken down into each of its parts. Absolutely. And the CDM, my understanding of the CDM regulations is that there should be someone who actually is accountable for the whole building and does that kind of work.
I think that's a really good point, which is very much about the way materials are tested. So again, this thing can be tested at this scale and might comply with some regulations, but on the scale of a kind of 27-storey high building, it operates completely differently. You're talking about a different system, and I think you're right. There's a gap there. Again, it goes back to Jane's gaps between the element that you're talking about, which is one panel, and the way it operates when it's 20 stories high.
And that work would have cost money. So it's not just saving money on inferior materials. It's saving money on not doing proper design work.
Yeah.
I was thinking that because, we all know about chimneys, and a fire needs air, and it needs, and I'm just a layperson, I'm just somebody who's nobody, but surely at the beginning, right at the beginning, they should have, this chimney effect, whether the cladding or the fancy bits were fireproof, and there was a fire, it would have gone up anywhere because of the chimney effect. So whoever designed within it a chimney effect.
It's why it is banned in America, and I think Germany as well. On buildings, and Germany banned on buildings over 6 stories, is it?
There's one point I'd like to make about this cascade of responsibility, and that is there was a very disastrous fire back in the 70s at a place called Summerland on the Isle of Wight, where there was a loss of life, considerable loss of life. And there was a public inquiry, and the findings of that inquiry, one of their important conclusions was that it was this dispersal of responsibility between subcontractors, sub-subcontractors, sub-sub-subcontractors, where nobody was getting a grip of the situation as a totality. And of course, under the old situation, that would be the Ofsted, together with their professional consultants. And I think that's a lot to do with what happened here.
Just we talk about councils, let's please also remember that it's central government as well, which is driving this opportunity to try and make sure that everything in our lives is okay.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Very glad both of you made that point, because that's the next slide that I'm going to show quickly. Going back to this gentleman's question over here, why was this deadly cladding put on? Now, the reason they're kind of saying about it was to put insulation on the building and improve its performance. We've looked at the planning application, and what it consistently says about the reason for the cladding is its appearance, that it was overwhelmingly cosmetic. Okay, due to its height, the tower is visible from the adjacent Avondale Conservation Area to the south and the Ladbroke Conservation to the west. The changes to the existing tower will improve its appearance, especially when viewed from the surrounding area. So not from inside, from outside. The materials were chosen, quote, to accord with the development plan by ensuring that the character and appearance of the area are preserved and living conditions of those living near the development, not inside it, are suitably protected. And can you believe this? It goes on, the reclad materials and new windows will present a significant improvement to the environmental performance of the building and its physical appearance. It concludes, the development will provide significant improvements to the physical appearance of the tower. This was a regeneration, but Grenfell Tower is part of a regeneration of this entire area, this entire ward. Now, what I'm showing you here is the original master plan, which was drawn up by a group called Urban Initiatives for the council in 2009. And the people on the estate here, they call this the kind of the scorched earth policy. It means demolish the whole lot. Grenfell Tower would be about here. This is Silchester Estate over here, people that we know, which is still up for demolition and redevelopment, entire demolition and redevelopment. To the bottom here, these are the 2 wings left of the Lancaster West Estate. The third one would be demolished, and it also involved all this redevelopment, demolition and redevelopment here. Let me just read you out some of these This is what they wanted to do originally to this estate. It says, the executive summary is the area suffers from housing stock in need of ongoing and expensive refurbishment. A range of social deprivation and other issues often associated with large post-war housing estates. This context means that land values are artificially depressed closer to the centre. The far-sighted option, this is the one here, aims to maximise overall value in the long term and create a high-quality new neighbourhood. This requires a number of significant interventions. We estimate that the project could deliver significant returns to the council. In order to present the most attractive offer in a competitive bidding process, the winning consortium would need to adopt the most optimistic approach to cost and/or values. Now, it says about Grenfell Tower, which is right at the centre of this refurbishment, the regeneration rather. We considered that the appearance of this building and the way in which it meets the ground blights much of the area east of Latimer Road, which runs down here. It also provides no outdoor space for residents. The reason it has got no outdoor space for residents is they built an academy here on its playing fields. That's the first thing that they've done. Now that part of the regeneration has actually been built. They've lost all their playing fields there. In fact, we were told by residents that the refurbishment of Grenfell Tower, the cladding, was seen as presented to them as a kind of an exchange for giving up their playing fields. It also said it is likely to be, this is Grenfell Tower, a type of construction that is hard to adapt. It says it does contain 120 homes, but on balance, our preferred approach is to assume demolition. We're running out of time, so I won't go through all this. If you want to have a look about this afterwards, I think this says pretty conclusively that the reasons for the cladding of this building were only ostensibly to insulate it. They were to improve the appearance of it. Because, of course, 2009, I think by the time they drew this up, the market in luxury housings, you got the financial crash and so on. So they went to the second option. This is the early value option. This is when the returns on it are accrued much more quickly. In this case, Grenfell Tower is here. The academy gets built. The whole of Silchester Estate here gets demolished and redeveloped. And the Lancaster West Estate here remains and gets refurbished. That's actually what happened. So this suggests that the master plan, even though it's been adapted to a less scorched earth policy, and in other words, it's only demolishing this, building this, and recladding that, this is the master plan behind why Grenfell Tower was refurbished. Now, I'm just going to say very, very quickly, the point I'm trying to get here is that the regeneration of our estates, this is not something which is local to Grenfell Tower or even to Silchester Estate. It's being carried out as a matter of policy across London, and it's actually a national strategy now. There is a estate regeneration national strategy which is targeting 100 estates, which they call sink estates for regeneration. There are, that we know of, well, there's probably at least 200 estate regeneration programs going on in London itself. And one of the things I also want to say is that this disaster has been taken up as an attack on the Tory government. Now, nobody hates the Tory government more than me, but London is council-led, it is a Labour city. And that we know of, there are 155 estate regeneration schemes being carried out in Labour boroughs alone by Labour councils. So this is not a choice between Labour and Tory. This is a cross-party estate regeneration programme, and it's also housing policy of both the Labour and the Tory parties. The reason that councils give for regeneration range, one of the key ones are the estate has fallen into decline and we don't have the money to refurbish it. Now, as Jane Rendell will tell you, the estimated cost of refurbishing the Aylesbury estate, which is just down the road from here, was estimated, how many years ago now, at 58%, the cost, up to 58%, the cost of its demolition and redevelopment. By now, I think it's gone way less than that, hasn't it? Demolition and redevelopment always costs much, much more than refurbishment. I think in 2006 or something like that, they estimated that the cost of demolishing each unit is £50,000 alone. The work that we do in Ash shows that the argument that we can't afford to refurbish estates is simply a lie. It always costs much more to redevelop them. Of course, what that means when you do redevelop is you get in all those private contractors and PFI deals which actually pay for it.
But the argument that Labour councils give, or particularly that Southwark responded to my point there, was to ignore the fact that refurb was cheaper as an option and to say they had no funding source to refurb. So then you get into an argument about how the funding sources for the councils work and how that's distributed or not from central government, and why certain Labour councils go into these arrangements and partnerships with private developers.
Sorry, the reason why I don't buy that one is because if that was the case, why does Southwark make such horrendous deals with developers and end up with £2 million whilst the developer gets £170 million? So
we're talking about the Haygate, where they've got to get contracts.
I am a lawyer, so I'm looking at it from a lawyer's perspective. I've worked with lots of social housing tenants in West London and Lambeth over many years. And I agree with everything that you've said. Sorry, I don't know your name. Particularly, I think that it's not a party politics thing. Over successive years, all governments, whether it's Labour or Tory, have favoured deregulation. Yeah. One of the perspectives that I find most interesting is about the model of the KCTMO. Yeah. Yeah. I have advocated for many years that the KCTMO is unaccountable in its structure. I mean, it is interesting that Grenfell Action Group were actually the voice of the tenants. Means that actually they're setting up these tenant management organisations, but the real voice is not there. And we need to rethink that model, including the fact that the regulator is now a quango called the Homes and Communities Agency. They're not bothered about regulating whether tenants are happy. And in fact, the regulator made that clear. He's really only interested in the financial side, what they call the economic standard, not the consumer standard. Because at the moment, they're not accountable to anyone. They're really accountable to the council. They've got a very close link with the council.
Just a very quick point as well, I'm only speaking about Southwark, is that also the relationship that the councillors have with the developers is also a massive problem. There's no restrictions on basically them switching over. We've had a number of key councillors who have switched over to jobs in developers.
Yeah, I think there's another point to raise, which is the race to the bottom in terms of building materials, quality, things like this. Not just in public housing, but in private housing. I go past the new Battersea Power Station development, in situ concrete, that's fine. Plywood, Tyvek, Kingspan, hammered copper finish. If that burns, that will burn. Now, you might say, well, they're people in £500,000 flats. They've probably got sprinklers and blah, 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 blah. They're probably empty anyway. That's not the point. The point is that the government, the councils, allow shoddy building practice to become the norm.
But there is a further incentive which is driving demolition and rebuild as opposed to refurb, and that is the inequitable application of VAT. That you have a 20% incentive to demolish and rebuild, in that all new housing is totally exempt from VAT.
That's true, yeah.
The only refurb work which is VAT exempt is work which is to do with reducing CO2 emissions.
The other thing is that they need to build more homes. There's this housing crisis on, there's a housing shortage. Now, this is one of the most dangerous kind of arguments, because what they say is we demolish an estate with, say, 1,000 homes on it, but we build 2,500 in place. And they always say that residents on it, tenants or leaseholders, have a right to return. This is the thing that Sadiq Khan, our London mayor, is always saying. Now, there is, in 2016, the Homes and Community Agency promised 4.7 billion quid for the Affordable Homes programme, help them to build it. That when they demolish estates, when they demolish council homes, or when they demolish housing association estates, homes for social rent, which is up to a third of market rent, are systematically being replaced with affordable housing. Now, affordable housing, it can mean, everyone kind of knows that it means up to 80% of market rate. It's actually worse than that. What is primarily being built in place of demolished homes for social rent is shared ownership properties. Shared ownership properties, you need 25% to buy into it. But the kind of buildings they're building in central London or inner London at the moment, for a 2-bedroom home is somewhere between £660,000 to £700,000. You need 25% of that. But it's even worse than that, because until the buyer owns 100% of the estate, they actually are only assured tenancies on it. And if they default in any way, they not only lose the home, they lose their deposit on it as well. I think it's one of the most extraordinary scams I've ever heard of.
Buying is almost the cost that the people used to pay before.
Exactly.
There's a lot of talk about...
They can't afford it. So they are moved out of the area, which there's a word for it. I don't want to call it because of... but there's everybody can call it for me. There's a word for it. What is happening is that we are no longer able to live.
That's why we are so against estate regeneration. Because estate regeneration means demolition and redevelopment. And what gets redeveloped, what gets put in its place, is not affordable. Certainly not the private homes, but not even the affordable quota. Affordable housing is not affordable anymore to anyone, unless they've got enough money to kind of buy the private home themselves. That's why in the middle of a housing crisis, and imagine a housing shortage, because it's actually not a crisis of supply, it's a crisis of affordability. There's lots of homes in this city. We can't let these homes be demolished, because what's replacing them is effectively an instrument of social cleansing. The people who are in them do not come back. That's what we know. We've even looked into studies that the more homes you supply, the more people move into a city, which drives up the prices. Building more homes does, it seems, you kind of hear this like, it's a simple question of supply and demand. That's not the way economics works. Supply does not reduce prices. Supply more actually puts prices up.
I went to a so-called consultation, which was in Peckham on Rye Lane about the shopping centre, it's the Elsham Shopping Centre. So I went to one of them and I was like standing up and saying, well, how many council homes are you going to build in this 1,000 flats? And they said they wouldn't say, and it was all like secret. And then now you look at Battersea Power Station, they're saying there's going to be no affordable flats, and of course no council flats. Anyway, what happened in the end is when the meeting finished, they had like an undercover security guard in the meeting, and he comes up to me and he goes, what's your name? And all this, like trying to get information from me. Luckily I know, because I've been in this situation loads of times, and I was like, who are you? He said, who paid for you to be here? He said, oh, I'm like kind of like not anger management, but like trying to like the UN would do, like some diplomatic kind of like professional that helps to consult and all this. And I was like, so what? Like who paid for you to be here? Was it the council or the developer? And he wouldn't say.
What you just talked about in terms of being accosted by this guy, I mean, clearly that's also, we saw that happening at Grenfell Action Group. Two of those people, weren't they were threatened with legal action for objecting to what was going on. This is happening all the time. All the kind of consultations that we've been involved with have had some form of bullying that's been discussed, and you're absolutely right.
So just on the political issue, I think it's really important to stress a point here that it's absolutely right. It's been cross-party successive governments that have all pursued a single policy which is not in fact unique to social housing. It is a general policy of public asset stripping. Britain is selling everything all the time to private developers. There are lots and lots of reasons for that, but it's a general direction of travel that's been present for a very long time across all parties, no doubt about it at all. It's almost like an anathema. You shouldn't own things publicly. Things should be owned privately, and the public services should be minimalist and should be there just to deal with emergencies, not very well as it transpires, but that's the type of service we're looking at. That has been the cross-party position, but don't for a minute think this issue is not political. It's deeply, deeply political, and therefore it's susceptible to change. It can actually change, and I think we're starting to see some of that Maybe not in local authority councils. That has to dribble down. It also has to change at the macro level. The borrowing requirements for local authorities would have to change. But we shouldn't give up on the political process, because actually it's the only way we're going to get out of this. Yeah. It's the only way you can seriously fight against the macro rules which dictate what happens at the local authority level. And I've got this feeling, I don't know what other people think, that Grenfell is going to become this huge symbol of what has gone wrong with this whole process of public asset stripping and pretending we're doing things for the public good, where in fact it's for private gain. Yeah. And hopefully we'll help make that happen.
But we feel that there's a reenactment of what happened in the 70s, where local authorities in central London put local authorities like our area under stress to just literally ship people out. We think that communities are valuable everywhere, and I don't say this in a way like I'm not coming here saying, oh, please don't come, but we also have thousands and thousands of empty properties in our area, which is an absolute outrage.
I want to give particularly the residents of these 3 blocks some words of reassurance that the characteristics that caused the disaster at Grenfell Tower in no way relate to these structures. We've already heard earlier on that the whole theory about fire safety in this country is dependent on compartmentalisation. That is to say, avoiding the spread of fire from one property to another. And in these structures, you have 1 hour compartmentalisation, which means that the actual structure itself will withstand an intense fire for 1 hour. The doors which give out into the escape routes from within the dwellings are half-hour rated, and the doors into the fire escape staircase are half-hour rated, so altogether you have 1 hour on the doors as well. Now, you also have, in every maisonette in this building, alternative means of escape, something which was not the case at Grenfell Tower. You will know, if you are familiar with your plan, this, I've marked up in red here what the escape route is. This is the staircase here. I'm sorry if those people over there can't see everything, but I shall leave this drawing here. This is the main entrance floor, where your living accommodation is. You go upstairs to your bedrooms, and from the bedroom level, you also have an escape door into a subsidiary corridor. Now, that is very important, that these corridors are never cluttered with any obstructions, and particularly nothing that is flammable. So that is something you need to check, because when you understand how the fire safety system works, it does need to be checked from time to time, if necessary together with a fire officer who will advise you. So the doors, which you will hardly ever use, hopefully will never have to use, from your bedroom floor onto the escape route, do not put heavy furniture in front of those doors. You must be able to use them quickly. And all fire escape doors open in the direction of travel, the direction of escape. That's quite deliberate. So they will lead you to the staircase. Another difference between, which we've already mentioned, these blocks and the Grenfell Tower, is you have no gas. Not only did you have an unprotected gas main rising in the escape route, it ruptured. So God knows what that did to accelerate the fire. You have here a dry riser in every block. A dry riser is an empty pipe, empty of water that is, but it's full of compressed air. And the fire brigade will come along and link that to a hydrant or link it to a tank of water that they have brought with them, and they will pump it up. This is much the most efficient way for them to get the water to the site of the fire, rather than carrying a very long hose up a staircase. Now, one of the reasons for the policy of remain in your dwelling and wait to be rescued, except for the one where the fire is, of course, is that the fire brigade will also want to use the staircase to come up and fight the fire. And if their access is impeded by streams of people running down the stairs, that will only slow things down.
Well, so if everyone, like most of us, is downstairs, I would not stay put. I would take my kids and go downstairs. Where should I go on the stairs? Where should I go?
This guy here wants to say something as well.
Hi, yeah. My name's Neil Wallace. I'm chair of the Residents Association for the 3 blocks just over the road on the Ethelred estate, all of which only have one staircase to get out, all of which have cladding, which, as far as I know, is not exactly the same kind, but we're still waiting to find out just exactly what kind it is. So, in a sense, we have a different series of priorities. One of my concerns, though, is that I am hearing over and over again, and completely understandably, people saying, well, if there's any kind of fire, I'm just going to get out. And there's a real danger that we create a different kind of problem here, because we had a fire recently at Brittany Point, which was contained in the right way. It was contained within the flat. That flat was gutted, but it didn't spread anywhere else. And just the people in the immediate area were moved out, everybody else stayed put. But if we have a situation in a block like ours where people are running down the staircase, maybe there's smoke, maybe someone trips, maybe a light's out, if people start falling on top of one another, you can have a completely different tragedy. And so we must bear that in mind. I know it's difficult. I'm not saying I understand exactly where the balance should be, but I'm just at least raising that issue for people.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point about why it is so dangerous, this idea that these tower blocks are dangerous and you have to run out of them. If you don't know, Grenfell Tower had a fire in 2010. It was contained as it was meant to be, and the firemen came in and put it out. And the fire brigade have said exactly the same thing. If the reason, this idea that they've only got a single exit, fires are contained within these blocks. Sorry, this has gone off now. The stairs are for the fire brigade to get up and fight the fire. And if you've got the entire block suddenly running down it, emptying, as this gentleman said, that's going to lead to far worse problems. That's why this kind of this narrative, which is taking hold, that these blocks are not safe from fire, is so very, very dangerous.
There's a further point I want to make, and that is, you may be aware of this, that the big killer in any fire is smoke. Most people die of suffocation before ever the fire reaches them. And every fire separation door should be stripped to exclude the air and stop the air getting to the fire, for one thing, because of course if you can starve the fire of oxygen, the fire will die anyway. And they should also be stripped with what's called an intumescent strip, which is a material that bubbles up when it gets to a certain temperature and seals the gap. So that's another thing to check on your fire doors.
Just very quickly, just in terms of for people here, today I went to get the fire risk assessment, which has been, Lambeth, they wrote to us and they said, they obviously wrote to us following the fire, and they said that they had recently done a fire risk assessment and that everything was kind of fine. And so I thought, okay, well I'll go and get that fire risk assessment. The concierge strangely didn't have a copy, which I thought was a bit odd. They are about to start what is called a stage 4 emergency analysis, sort of fire risk assessment of all these blocks. Partly because he thinks that actually this wasn't done terribly well. But the dry risers that you were talking about, they don't mention them on here, or rather the box isn't ticked. So I think this just goes back to us really forcing the point to them that we want to make sure this is done properly.
And also with the fire doors, I'm on the 19th. The wind blows the fire doors open. I've taken a video into them and showed them this, and I'm still waiting to hear back because they're ajar, and I said that means if there's a wind anyhow, it's going to escalate the fire down the corridor.
Yeah.
The issue there also is that leaseholders have a choice to have a fire door put on, whereas tenants are having the fire doors put on. So, there is another social separation going on there that actually puts everyone at risk.
Yeah. Briefly talk about sprinklers. What the fire regs say is that where you've got only a single means of escape, as of course was the case in Grenfell Tower, there should be sprinklers, which there weren't. Where you've got alternative means of escape, there you can get away without sprinklers. Those, of course, sprinklers would always be an additional safety. But certainly, every fire door should have a self-closer on it, an operating self-closer. And what I've just heard about a fire door swinging in the wind, that is just not on.
I started a petition online around the Larkinall inquest, and basically said what happened after that. That took 4 years to come out, and there were recommendations that came out from the coroner on that. Then the Department for Communities and Local Government said it was up to individual councils to decide whether or not they were actually going to take those recommendations. What my petition is calling for is actually for the DCLG to actually force councils to do it. So, as I say, I'm now trying to actually see whether I can get a meeting with DCLG. If anybody's able to help at all in that, I would much appreciate it.
Extremely pertinent. I'd just like to make the comparison with Runham Point. When the Runham Point disaster happened, this building was actually on site at the time. Within 6 months, the building regs had been revised, and new criteria were introduced whereby all big panel system structures had to go through a further strengthening to resist internal explosion, even though they weren't allowed to have gas. 4 years after the Larkinall inquiry and recommendations, zero action. The difference is political.
I think that moves us very naturally onto what are we going to do about all this stuff.
Yeah. Thank you for staying around in this very long meeting. I think it's important though that we do address this fourth point. It's like, what are we going to do with all this? What are we going to do with this knowledge, and not just let the meeting end here? I said at the beginning that one of the things that we're most concerned about is the use that's being made of this fire to further promote what is already a very advanced estate demolition programme. We've got lovely people like Simon Jenkins in The Guardian calling residential towers are antisocial, high maintenance, disempowering, unnecessary, mostly ugly, and never truly safe. I know right there that he's never lived on one. You always find commentators, they talk about the buildings. I always feel they're talking about the people in them, the kind of the very emotional language they use. Andrew Grimson, a Tory, although as I said, there's no difference. I would not ever want to live in one of those towers. I prefer my little terraced house. So if they can, do most people. Most people in, a shoddy, this is how he describes these blocks, a shoddy second-rate solution masquerading as some sort of progress. Lumpen, inhumane. Can't we tear down these repulsive blocks and get back to building the decent, modest streets where people actually want to live? Now, the redevelopment models which are being promoted by people like Savills and Create Streets, think tanks and so on, are to demolish high-rise blocks, council blocks, and redevelop them as mid-rise, very, very dense buildings. Strangely enough, that doesn't apply to the enormously high tower blocks that people like Lendlease are building just around the corner from you. Okay, so it's good. Doesn't apply to the enormously but more dangerously, you've got David Lammy. Now, I know David Lammy. He's the MP for Tottenham, and I know he lost someone in the fire. And he's been very emotional about this. But he said there are 700 tower blocks of 11 stories or more in the capital alone. The vast majority were built in the 1960s and 70s. The conditions in Grenfell Tower are mirrored in housing estates across the country. We've seen tonight that is not true. That's a very dangerous statement for an MP who has become almost like the spokesperson on this fire. For decades, we've consigned people to live in overcrowded conditions that are not just unacceptable, but in many cases are criminally unsafe. And as an example of these criminally unsafe, he cited Broadwater Farm, the estate in Tottenham, which actually has one of the lowest crime rates of any urban place in the entire country. Families live in hutches, not houses. It's very emotive language. Actually, we know that the buildings like this, they're far bigger proportions and far better built than the kind of rubbish that they're building in their place. He says those 70s buildings, many of them should be demolished. Now, David Lambie is the MP for Tottenham. In his constituency, there are two estates, Broadwater Farm and Northumberland Park, thousands of homes which have been condemned to demolition and redevelopment by the Haringey development vehicle that the council, which is a Labour council, has just entered into as part of a £2 billion land sale. So I'm very suspicious about this guy using this fire, being very emotional about it. I'm not interested in what his individual, but he's using this fire to promote something that is happening in his constituency. Sorry? Oh yes. The people who are who they've entered into this contract with, this $2 billion HDV, this Haringey Development Vehicle, is the international property developers Lend-Lease. They're the ones who are rebuilding on the Haygate here. And as we know, they demolished 1,200 homes and they promised 82 for social rent. The last person is our lovely mayor. He says the greatest legacy of this tragedy may well end up being the skyline of our towns and cities. In the post-war rush to reconstruct our country, towers went up in large numbers, most of which are still here today. Nowadays, we would not dream of building towers to the standards of the 1970s, and we certainly wouldn't, because this rubbish that we're building nowadays is nowhere near the standards that we built then. But their inhabitants still have to live with that legacy. And this is the crucial bit. It may well be that the defining outcome of this tragedy, as he calls it, that the worst mistakes of the 60s and 70s are systematically torn down. Now, in December, the GLA, the Greater London Authority, published a draft good practice guide to estate demolition. Now, if you want to know about this, go onto our blog, our website. We've written a very, very long response to it. It was handed out to estate communities across London for their consultation. And on it, amongst many other things, he removed the condition that there would be no demolition of a council estates if it led to a loss of social housing. Now, that condition is going to be completely removed and replaced first with, it can be replaced with affordable housing, but it actually can be replaced with high quality housing. You don't even need to build that as well. He also said originally, when he was getting elected, that he would make resident support for any estate regeneration, exactly like Grenfell Tower, or the full demolition, a condition of it going ahead. He's removed that. And he's refused what many residents have called for, which is a veto on the demolition of their estates. The point I'm trying to make here is estate regeneration, demolition, as a policy, which this mayor is absolutely behind, is precisely replicating the privatisation, the arm's length management, and the lack of accountability of councils, management organisations, which led directly to the Grenfell Tower fire. That's why we have to oppose it. So, what I want to do now is what we've been doing for 2 years and other people are doing for much longer, is we need to oppose this, but we also need to call for accountability from the people who are managing these homes. I think we have to stop the management of people's homes over the people who are managing them as assets to make profit out of them. We need to set up structures where the people who are in charge of people's homes are listening to the residents. Because what's come out of Grenfell, I think, most of all, is that the residents who genuinely, tragically, for 4 years, issued report after report after report to the TMO, fearing for the safety of their lives from fire. And those reports were completely ignored. And as anyone who knows, who works in campaigns to resist estate demolition, that arrogance, that lack of listening, the lack of accountability is replicated across this borough, across this city, across this country actually, whenever the state regeneration programs are coming in place.
What I think, what I feel, or what they did around Grenfell, if you look at all the people they asked a question, they want professionals in what you are seeing and can analyze it. I can give you the tiers if you want that. But it won't go anywhere. We need a body of professionals, especially the lawyers. Because I've heard nothing about any class action suit. I've heard about criminal charges. I've heard a lot of stuff. But where is the body that coming in to say, well, okay, we are going to represent you and we are going to ask for a 200 million. So we know somebody will feel the pain of it.
I mean, I don't think you should underestimate how much there is a concern across a lot of professions about this issue. I mean, Ash themselves have demonstrated that this evening in terms of being architects trying to mobilise people around these issues. And the lawyers will respond. There's other lawyers in this room, I suspect, who would take a similar view. The difficulty, I suppose, fundamentally is this, that what the law can't really do is what the politicians have the unique and sole ability to do, which is make political judgments. What lawyers can do is try and call out those political judgments as not being sound or being in contravention of certain pre-existing principles. But in order to really mount a serious campaign to stop these types of things, it needs to be multifaceted. You need to have the lawyers doing what they're doing, you need to have the campaigners doing what they're doing, you need to have the experts willing to give their time for free, exactly as you're saying, sir. So to do that, you do need an active organisation with a singular body, and then the law will follow that, and the cases will definitely follow that. It's not a shortage of expertise, perhaps it's a shortage of time and coming together and organisation, but hopefully today is the beginning of that process.
Sorry, I just wanted to make a really quick point about the culture of subcontracting and then subcontracting again. One of the myths about this thing is that it's about efficiency and saving money. In fact, it often doubles and trebles the cost of what things should cost. And we need to nail them on the fact that this is a grossly inefficient way. It's not just about lack of accountability and the fact that it's very difficult to get anything done, to hold people to account. But every company it goes through, every manager it goes past, takes a slice out of that public purse, the money we've paid to get a service, and they're all putting a brown envelope in their back pocket in effect, and we're getting a worse service at a higher price.
Just a couple of thoughts on where you could go politically within certain things is that all housing associations should have at least 6 residents trained and on their board at any one time, and that the Homes and Communities Agency or something similar, there should be a proper housing ombudsman that can look into malpractice and how things go wrong and what can do to put it right. So there's actually teeth within the system.
Political solutions, I'll be very practical. Lewisham Hospital campaign, it won and it stopped Lewisham A&E from getting closed down by the central government's cuts. That is a Labour borough as well, and so forth and so forth. It's been said already. But how it was won is that there was 20,000 people out on the streets and they blocked the whole of Lewisham and they said, we're not going away until you stop doing this. That is a massive threat to the powers that are listening, and they sit up and listen when that happens. They get shocked. They say, why is this person that's not politically connected or not in a trade union or not part of some organisation, why are they out in the street? They shouldn't care. Well, they do, and they've been they've gained consciousness of some kind, and they've taken a day off and they're out in the street. Then later there was a judicial review, and they took the government to court. They won, and then the government appealed, and then they won the appeal as well. But the kind of error that they made in some ways is they made it a purely legal campaign after a certain point. And all of that energy, all those people that got trained up and sort of mobilised, were never mobilised again. And I think that they did a fantastic job, and I supported them thoroughly, till the end and all the rest of it. But I think that we can't have a purely legal campaign. It has to, and going to your writing to your MP, do that as well, whatever. But what needs to happen is a change in the whole political landscape by getting out on the street and people just saying, We're not going to go away until you bloody open that fire escape. We're going to come to the council and protest and picket your door at 9 in the morning and stop you going to work. Yeah. And then they listen, and then they do it. And then you get what you want. The other fine example, Comrade's t-shirt, Focus E15, they went into housing offices and they sat on the floor, 20 of them, and they said, we're not getting out until this person gets rehoused in the borough. No, you can't send them to Liverpool or whatever. We're not moving until you rehouse them. And they got hundreds of people rehoused from the Focus E15 housing unit, and just people that came to them and wanted to fight. And then a whole group of people got involved. That's how I know so many other people, because we met through this active campaign that everyone took part in. And it's probably the biggest housing campaign in the country. Yeah, and it's not a trade union campaign or anything like that. It's just people that got together and done it in different groups and different supporters and so forth. So I think there's something to be learned in that, and we should go to the streets and block the streets and go to the council and the bloody private companies that are involved. Yeah. You know, Rydon. You know, this guy that owns it or whatever has the biggest shares took home $1 million last year. The company, what, they got 8 million for that refurb. How much did it cost them? Probably 4 million. Yeah, the rest is just money in their pocket. So we have to target all of these people.
I'm hoping that people are going to be able to mobilise on the back of what happened at Grenfell, because obviously across London, everybody who lives on estates that have high tower blocks are urgently concerned about the situation. Now everybody is going to have to act within their own tenants' organisations to put pressure on their relevant councils, whoever's managing those properties. While that's happening, we need people who are going to build the connections between the different groups. And I hope that that can feed into the bigger demand, which is that people are saying, while we're talking to you and making demands on you, we don't want you turning around to us and saying, we're going to demolish your homes for your own good. Because the point of this that you're making so clearly is that these are not homes that there is a problem with. So I can volunteer my services. I think what Ash is doing is amazing. I hope more people can get involved. Your list of all the councils that are under threat by Labour, I'm a journalist and activist. It's something I'm still trying to find the time to look into. We need more people who can come on board to do more of these things. We need people who can join groups of people in different places to one another and who are prepared to offer time. I'm prepared to offer time. I hope other people are as well.
Lawyer, I just wanted to echo really what Jamie said. There are lots of lawyers out there who are thinking about these issues and who are thinking about where the gaps are and what legal remedies might be appropriate to try and fill those gaps. And meetings like this are the first stage in making connections between lawyers who are interested in these issues and residents, and hearing residents' concerns and talking to groups of residents and making those connections and thinking about going forward. But I also agree that legal remedies aren't the only solution here. I think it needs to be a concerted effort. It's a political problem as well as a legal one. I think we need to think about a sort of holistic approach to it.
I agree with that, and I think that having a skills base and a forum, what you've done tonight, I think is brilliant, and all the work that you do, and I think bringing all these different types of skills together, maybe this could be more like a regular meeting that we would have as a forum to discuss. I do think, though, speaking for my own profession, architecture, I don't think architects are doing enough in general. Most of them won't speak out at public inquiries because of client interest, and they put that above public interest. But I think if there are enough people who are prepared to spend time and share skills, I think we need some QSs on board pretty badly. That's a real skill that's missing.
Quantity surveyors.
Quantity surveyors for costings, that's really, really key. And I do think that the legal side is really important, because that's like a kind of fire stop in a way. What we discovered with the Aylesbury is people put in so much work on lots of different issues, but the only one that actually stuck was the issue to do with human rights and to do with the equalities assessment, and no one would have known that without a legal background. Right. So I do think that we have to recognise what it is that the different professions can do and how they can kind of jam some of these processes.
And I would suggest that everyone who goes back, if you go back to an estate, if you go back to a TRA, anywhere, have a meeting like this with the people that you're with. So take something away from this, go back, have a meeting next week in your estate, wherever you are, in your community, talk about this with them.
think about the ways in which your local community is affected by this. Is something happening in your area? Are you confronted with the possibility of needing, I don't know, some kind of refurbishment coming up soon? Is there a problem with this? And I think it's really saying it's about people coming together, but it's also about what you do when you leave this room. Because you're all, as you say, you're coming from that gentleman there, he's from Barnet or whatever. There's stuff happening over there, and you need to be doing that stuff over there and then bringing it back in again. So I think just, if everybody from this room goes back and starts that little conversation over there, that would be really, really important thing to do.
One of the most terrible things I think that came out of this terrible disaster is, I think it was 3 years ago, the Grenfell Action Group said they thought it would take a tragic fire, a disaster like this, to get the council to listen to them. Unfortunately it has, but it's also taken, I think, this to get London to suddenly be aware of what's going on. And we need to get our message out there, to get the truth out there, and not allow what's actually happening at the moment. Because what we've learned through fighting estate demolition is the people doing this, they manage opposition. We've already seen, in relation to what that guy was saying over there, we've already seen that the papers are trying to divide people into those with a just grievance and all those nasty little activists and housing campaigners getting on it. They're already trying to say who can protest, who can be upset, who's got a legitimate case in this. And we can't accept that. And we need to oppose this. Okay, I think the best way we can honour the dead in this terrible, terrible disaster is to speak the truth about what happened here. And because at the moment, Grenfell Tower is like a mirror. The conditions that produced it are being replicated in our reactions to it, and we can't allow that to happen. Okay, thanks for coming.